Before I go into this lecture, let me quickly establish a premise. And that premise is that when you go through the history of Nigeria, you will discover that the British colonial government did not create Nigeria. The Anglican Church did. And as a result of that, I hope the History Committee of the Church will also develop another volume that talks about the Anglican Church and the making of modern Nigeria. That is very important. We have adequate materials to show the contributions of the Anglican Church to the creation of the substructure and the foundation that led to the Nigerian superstructure. So it is very significant that the history of this church and of this country be written in fundamentally important ways that will showcase the importance of this church to the creation of modern Nigeria. But let me also come to an early conclusion. And that conclusion is that ever since the Anglican Church moved back from the Nigerian state, that was when the Nigerian state began to have problems. Anglican Church adherents must move forward to recreate what we have seen in history done by the Anglican Church. The day the Anglican Church moves back into the political terrain, I can assure you that Nigeria will become good. This church defined the existence of the Nigerian state. And I'm going to show you at some point where the Anglican Church moved back from the Nigerian state. And that was the beginning of the problem. So at times when they preach to you, oh, you can't church and state, you have to separate church and state. Even Britain has not separated church and state. Even Britain. Because if you listen to Prince Charles, who is now King Charles, when he was taking his oath, he promised to defend the faith. So how do we then separate it? You know, we are not saying that, oh, pastors should go and take offices. What we are trying to say is that the ideals of the church, the philosophy of the church, the value of the church must be allowed to move into the political terrain. That's what we are saying. That's what we are saying. And how best will you do it? It is by all of you representing us in that terrain. But if you move backwards from what is happening there, we'll all continue to complain. And 2023 is coming. How many of us are involved in the process? And so when people will emerge, you leave everything to God. And St. Augustine, the Bishop of Hippo, had said in the 5th century, God who created us without us will not save us without us. So you have to be involved. The Bible will say, so if you move backwards and say, no, I don't want to be involved, you cannot complain. So it is significant that we all bring those ethos, those values, those ideas that we have within the church into government. If we don't do that, okay, good to all of us. After all, we now see many of us are going to grow old, not seeing our children or grandchildren again because they have left. If you have enough money or if they send money to go and greet them wherever they are, that's fine. But it's been some time since I've been growing up in this country. I have never seen the exodus of young people out of this country as we are witnessing now. It's terrible. As Yoruba will say, they are living because they don't have any hope. They don't have any hope because the parents are not bringing the values and ideals and the ethos into governance. So if you blame government, blame yourself. Blame yourself. We have to begin to move nearer government, to begin to affect government, to begin to influence government, to make our children happy. Oh, they are going to these countries abroad. They are not happy there. Every day they are thinking about Nigeria. They want to come home, but they can't come home. You know, so it is very significant that we begin to rethink the entire process. So it was the gateway to modern society that was clearly emerging from the ashes and ruins of the transatlantic slave trade and the wrong-headed ethos of the traditional warrior aristocracy. Once the missionaries had planted the Anglican Church in Nigeria, it began to play an exceedingly important role in defining the country's existence. The church incubated people who achieved fame as missionaries, government officials, professional men and women, or those who acquired considerable wealth through industry, commerce, and businesses. These also comprise, among others, teachers, lawyers, doctors, nurses, and technicians. So let me now move towards the conclusion by looking at the intersection of the past, present, and future. We cannot always be talking about the past, present, without looking at the future. Here, I should dwell on the need to preserve the records of the past, because if you do not preserve the records of the past, the history of this church will be written by outsiders with strange documents. And that is why one of the African proverbs is very important in this, that until the lions have their own historians, the history of hunting will always be written from the perspective of the hunter. It's the same thing with us. If you don't bring your documents together, and then we have enough documents to also, as outsiders, work on to write the history of the Anglican Church, the history of Nigeria, then of course some people will be claiming that they are the masters of modern Nigeria. It's not the Sokoto Caliphate, it's the Anglican Church. It's the Anglican Church. And so now that history is being rewritten, and then some people tell us on WhatsApp, oh, they handed Nigeria over to some people. But who are those people who created what they are handing over? Nobody hears about that. So then you must endeavor to put together all the records. And I'm happy that you have created an archival division that is going to look into this. And my friend happily is in charge of that. You know, old abandoned buildings must be reinforced in some places and should be used as libraries and documentation center. The Cathedral of St. James in Ibadan takes the credit for being organized in this respect. Even then, many documents are still missing, and some are in private hands. All documents in private hands, please tell them to submit. Nigeria now has the Nigerian National Archives. The archives of the Anglican Church should have come before the archives of Nigeria, because we have the documents. They are scattered everywhere. They are also in private hands. The Anglican Communion has the duty to free Nigeria from its weaknesses and missteps. As co-creators of the Nigerian state, it must go beyond the moral lessons in the church to engage in frontal participation in politics, rejuvenation of its institutions, and the speaking of truth to power. The Anglican Church was an organization of indisputably gargantuan influence in Britain. Ayodele, the historian, had once said of the CMS, and I quote him, "The influence of the Church Missionary Society in moving either the British government or the British public to accepting a line of action on events occurring in different parts of Africa in the later half of the 19th century is not to be underestimated." End of quotation. He continued further, and I quote him, and he's talking about Nigeria now. In Nigeria, the influence of the Church Missionary Society was dreaded by virtually every governor in this country. Colonial governor. Kill our Anglicans, so. Does anybody care any longer? At what point did you lose this kind of influence? You know, by virtually every governor up to the outbreak of the First World War. So it was after the First World War that the Anglican Church began to gradually lose influence over the Nigerian state. But before then, whatever the Anglican Church said was almost law in this country. The society's imagined importance is illustrated by the attempts of all parties in Britain who had interest in the Niger territory between 1886 and 1900 to win its support. Everybody was always looking up to the Anglican Church to win its support. Are we still in that situation today? At what point in Nigerian history did the Anglican Church remove its influence from the progressive change witnessed in this country? The church now needs to develop a grand strategy. There has to be a grand strategy to regain that influence. That must be done quickly, quietly, and effectively.